Selamat siang dan selamat datang. Saya ucapkan kepada Bapak dan Ibu narasumber dan peserta webinar Hak Berdaulat versus Kapal Ikan Asing yang diselenggarakan oleh Indonesia Ocean Justice Initiative pada hari ini, 26 Oktober 2020. Perkenalkan, saya Stefani Juwana dari Indonesia Ocean Justice Initiative. Dan sebelum kita memulai diskusi, saya akan bacakan terlebih dahulu beberapa tata tertib untuk menjaga kelancaran webinar kita hari ini. Yang pertama, webinar ini akan direkam dan juga ditayangkan secara live di YouTube melalui akun Indonesia Ocean Justice Initiative. Maka Bapak dan Ibu peserta, jika berhalangan untuk ikut serta di Zoom, dapat juga mengikuti webinar ini di YouTube. Kemudian nomor 2, bagi peserta yang menginginkan sertifikat, harap mengisi absensi di link yang akan diberikan di kolom chat di Zoom maupun juga di YouTube. Absensi ini hanya bisa diisi sepanjang webinar berlangsung dan harap mengisi dengan nama yang diinginkan di sertifikat. Sertifikat akan diberikan ke email paling lambat 10 hari kerja setelah webinar ini selesai. Dan nomor 3, kami menyediakan terjemahan dari bahasa Inggris ke bahasa Indonesia maupun dari bahasa Indonesia ke bahasa Inggris. Dan untuk mengaktifkannya, silakan tombol globe yang ada di layar, biasanya ada di sebelah kanan bawah, itu ditekan, kemudian pilih bahasa yang ingin didengar. Namun kami informasikan bahwa bahasa Indonesia tersedia di channel Jepang. Jadi kami mohon maaf atas ketidaknyamanannya, sekali lagi bahasa Indonesia tersedia di channel Jepang. Dan rekan-rekan juga dapat mematikan original audio kalau ingin mendengarkan terjemahannya saja. Dan kolom chat akan kami gunakan untuk kepentingan pemberian informasi dan absensi. Peserta yang ingin memberikan pertanyaan dapat diajukan di fitur question and answer di Zoom maupun di kolom komentar di YouTube. Pertanyaan akan kami kumpulkan, kemudian kami pilih beberapa pertanyaan dan kami bacakan kepada narasumber di sesi tanya-jawab. Saat bertanya, harap menyebutkan nama, asal instansi, dan juga pertanyaan yang diajukan. Materi semua akan di-upload di website, yaitu oceanjusticeinitiative.org. Baik, hari ini kita akan membahas topik yang sangat penting dan judulnya dari webinar ini pun juga sangat menarik, yaitu Hak Berdaulat versus Kapal Ikan Asing. Dan untuk memberikan gambaran dan setting the scene diskusi ini, saya ingin persilakan CEO of Indonesia Ocean Justice Initiative, Bapak Mas Ahmad Santosa, untuk menyampaikan epilog atau kata sambutannya. Waktu saya persilahkan, Pak Ota.
Baik, selamat sore para pembicara dan para peserta webinar ini. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, namo buddhaya, salam sejahtera untuk seluruh peserta webinar ini. Atas nama IOGI, terima kasih telah bergabung dalam webinar ini. Semoga kita semua dalam keadaan sehat dan terhindar dari COVID-19 dan semuanya dalam keadaan produktif, walaupun mungkin di Indonesia lebih banyak kita work from home. Dalam 2,5 jam ke depan, kita akan berdiskusi mengenai pengelolaan sumber daya ikan yang berada di zona eksklusif ekonomi Indonesia. Pengelolaan perikanan di Indonesia memiliki beberapa dasar hukum. Yang pertama adalah Undang-Undang Dasar Negara Republik Indonesia 1945, kemudian Konvensi PBB tentang Hukum Laut yang telah kita ratifikasi, dan Undang-Undang Perikanan tentunya. Konstitusi Indonesia dan UNCLOS, yang seringkali UNCLOS ini disebut sebagai Global Constitutions of the Oceans, mengatur bahwa pengelolaan sumber daya alam, termasuk sumber daya ikan, adalah untuk kepentingan nasional. Pada pasal 33 ayat 3 Undang-Undang Dasar 1945, Indonesia Constitutions menyebutkan bahwa kekayaan alam dikuasai oleh negara dan dipergunakan untuk sebesar-besarnya kemakmuran rakyat. Dan pada pasal 56 UNCLOS disebutkan bahwa negara pantai memiliki hak berdaulat atau sovereign rights yang menurut the International Law Commission, Yearbook of the International Law Commission 1956, bersifat eksklusif. Eksklusif berarti hak terhadap sumber daya ikan mutlak dimiliki oleh negara pantai. Mesti negara tersebut belum memiliki kemampuan untuk mengeksploitasinya. Kedua norma ini wajib menjadi acuan dalam penyusunan kerangka hukum pengelolaan perikanan untuk mengakomodir kepentingan masyarakat Indonesia. Terdapat banyak cara untuk dapat mengembangkan kemampuan nelayan asli Indonesia sehingga tingkat produksi pada sektor perikanan tangkap meningkat. Pengaturan perundang-undangan di bidang perikanan harus memiliki pasal-pasal yang jelas dan tegas mengenai prinsip kehati-hatian yang sangat tinggi untuk membuka akses sumber daya ikan Indonesia bagi entitas asing agar tidak merugikan kepentingan nasional. Melalui webinar ini, kita akan berdiskusi mengenai praktek pengelolaan perikanan dari beberapa negara dalam konteks pelaksanaan hak berdaulat. Telah hadir dalam webinar ini para pembicara yang sangat kompeten. Yang pertama, Duta Besar Arif Hafaz Ugroseno, ahli hukum laut internasional yang berpengalaman sebagai Chief Negotiator Indonesia dalam berbagai perundingan bilateral maupun multilateral, baik dalam kapasitas sebagai senior diplomat maupun pejabat senior di Kemenkomar. Selanjutnya Profesor Warwick Gullett yang merupakan profesor pada Fakultas Hukum Universitas Wollongong, Australia. Profesor Warwick merupakan ahli di bidang hukum laut yang aktif menerbitkan buku antara lain Fisheries Law in Australia, Asia Pacific and the Implementation of the Law of the Sea, Regional Legislative and Policy Approaches to the Law of the Sea Convention tahun 2016 dan berbagai publikasi lainnya. Profesor Warwick menjabat sebagai Dekan Fakultas Hukum Universitas Wollongong dari tahun 2012 sampai dengan tahun 2016. Saat ini beliau aktif sebagai salah satu komite untuk Asia Pacific Journal of Ocean Law and Policy. Telah hadir juga Profesor Francis Nuno. Profesor Francis Nuno adalah Associate Professor pada University of Ghana. Saat ini ia merupakan Head of Department of Marine and Fisheries Sciences di University of Ghana. Dan Profesor Nuno telah menerbitkan banyak publikasi di bidang perikanan, salah satunya adalah Illegal, Unreported, dan Unregulated Fishing, Activities on Fisheries Sustainability, Evidence from Lake Volta, Ghana, yang baru saja diterbitkan terlalu lama, 2019. Profesor Nuno tergabung dalam IUCN Specialist Group, International Association for Impact Assessment, dan berbagai badan lainnya. Kemudian perwakilan dari pemerintah New Zealand, Bapak Gary Orr, Director of Compliance Services dari Ministry of Primary Industries dari New Zealand, akan menyampaikan juga presentasinya. Kami telah mengundang, sebagaimana tadi dijelaskan, telah mengundang Direktur Jenderal Perikanan Tangkap Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan Republik Indonesia, Bapak Zaini, namun beliau belum dapat memenuhi undangan karena menghadiri kegiatan lainnya. Kami ucapkan selamat berdiskusi dan semoga hasilnya dapat memberikan manfaat yang besar bagi negara, bagi saya kira mudah-mudahan beyond Indonesia, dalam merumuskan kebijakan negara yang berpihak pada kepentingan nasional yang didasarkan pada prinsip keadilan, berkelanjutan, dan berwawasan lingkungan. Untuk mempersingkat waktu, saya sudahi sambutan saya dan saya sampaikan kembali kepada Stephanie Juwana. Saya persilakan.
Baik, terima kasih Bapak Mas Ahmad Santosa. Hari ini kita memiliki sejumlah narasumber. Yang pertama adalah His Excellency Arif Hafaz Ugresono LLM. Beliau adalah Duta Besar Republik Indonesia untuk Republik Federal Jerman. Dan yang kedua adalah Profesor Warwick Gullett dari University of Wollongong. Dan yang ketiga adalah Profesor Francis Nuno dari University of Ghana. Dan kemudian akan ada pembacaan pernyataan tertulis dari Kementerian Perikanan New Zealand. Jadi perwakilan dari New Zealand tidak dapat hadir secara langsung bersama dengan kita saat ini, namun telah berbaik hati memberikan pernyataan tertulisnya yang akan kami bacakan. Kemudian Bapak Direktur Jenderal Perikanan Tangkap, Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan, Bapak Zaini juga menyampaikan permohonan maafnya tidak bisa mengikuti webinar ini karena ada kegiatan di waktu yang bersamaan dengan Menteri Kelautan dan Perikanan. Di akhir diskusi akan ada penyampaian ringkasan hasil diskusi oleh Bapak Andreas Aditya Salim dari Indonesia Ocean Justice Initiative. Baik, saya akan langsung persilakan untuk narasumber pertama kita, yaitu Bapak Arif Hafaz. Pak Hafaz akan berbicara mengenai konsep sovereign rights di ZEE dan juga pengelolaan sumber daya perikanan di ZEE, khususnya berkaitan dengan surplus allowable catch. Waktu saya persilakan kepada Pak Hafaz.
Terima kasih, Stephanie, Pak Ahmad Santosa, Profesor Warwick Gullett, and Professor Francis Nuno. A very good day to all of you. I don't know exactly what time you are in now, but here in Berlin, it's 7:15 in the morning. And I would like to extend my thanks to Dr. Ota and his team to invite me for this very interesting occasion today. I will start with a very simple, quick historical perspective of EEZ. I think for Professor Warwick and Professor Nuno, you're well aware of this, but probably other colleagues in the audience not yet well aware. The EEZ is actually, I would say, a very rare situations whereby it is a revolutionary legal concept that evolved very, very quickly. The first idea that kicked in the sovereign rights of country all the way to 100 nautical miles, of course, came up from Truman declarations on the shelf issue. But then again, Chile and Peru in 1947s are also making similar declarations. The Arab states in 1949, we have another declarations from the Latin American countries, Santiago declarations, Montevideo declarations, Lima declarations, all were done in 1970. Santo Domingo declaration in 72. And then we have the Asia-Africa Legal Consultative Committee, ALCC. I was in these delegations about 10 years ago on different issue. ALCC made a statement on the EEZ and the continental shelf in 1972. And then specifically a number of African countries through different declarations such as Yaoundé Conclusion 1972 also launched this new legal thinking. And already in 1973, during the third Conference of Law of the Sea, a working group on maritime zones, including EEZ, was established. So from 1945 up to 1973, coming from a political statement and then finally becoming a draft legal document, it's very, very fast. And this is something that is not discussed in the past before that, and then it became international law after the Convention of Law of the Sea was adopted in 82 and then ratified by many countries, including, of course, countries in this panel of discussions. So these are the quick glance of the historical perspective of EEZ itself. Now, as to the legal principle of EEZ itself, I think there are three important aspects as a core of this legal principle. Number one is sui generis. It's very unique in and out of itself. It's not under full sovereignty, but you have some sovereign rights of the coastal states. It's not a high seas as such, but there are some element of high seas in freedom of navigations, but not in terms of resources. So it's a very unique legal principle where high seas are only part of it, the sovereignty is only part of it. So it's very unique arrangement. And the second one is the rights of the coastal states to manage the zone responsibly with a number of measures that needs to follow the issue of marine conservation. And the third one is the rights of other countries to access also responsibly. So if we are looking at these legal principles, then it actually resembles the nature of the UNCLOS itself, which is a compromise, which is take and give. And if I recall correctly, there was one principle that was the guiding principles during the negotiations, which is nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So all the countries, they are not very happy in this article. They are looking for compensation in the other article. So there's a lot of give and take, and EEZ is one of the clear examples of give and take in this regard. Now, I'm going to go to have a one-page PDF. Hang on a second. Okay, can you see my PDF? Andreas?
Yes, but we can see our PDF, but it is not in full screen yet.
Hang on a second. Full screen now? Can you see in a full screen?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right. So this is my a little bit of explanation how we read Article 62. So we are hearing different statements from different parties that Article 62 is a basis for foreign countries to access EEZ of other countries. It is true, but if you look very comprehensively, you look on the top left, Article 62.1 basically states that the coastal states shall promote the objective of optimum utilization of living resources in the EEZ without prejudice to Article 61. So 62.1 immediately goes to Article 61. And in Article 61, you have a number of measures as a conditions for responsible management of the EEZ. And number one is scientific evidence, and then measures on conservation and management, and then cooperations with competent international organizations. It could be regional or international, like FAO, for instance. You need to maintain and restore population of harvested species. You have a number of activities that you have to do in order to implement Article 62. So Article 62 is not just automatically as a basis for for exploitations of the EEZ. You have to take steps in order to be able to show to the world that you are a responsible coastal states in the conservation of the living resources in the EEZ. And that is quite heavy, because then the question is whether a coastal states have already such measures that falls within Article 61, whether that is a ministerial decision or government decisions or presidential decisions. It's really up to the countries by themselves. But we all need to see that Article 62, it's not an automatic right as such. It's discretion is of course with coastal states, but it is very important to look at what are the measures that country needs to take in order to responsibly manage the EEZ. And then Article 62.2, yes, this is the basis of coastal states to give access to external states in terms of total allowable catch. But again, you have to refer to Article 69 and Article 70. It is not just automatically you give it to the other countries, the TAC, the total allowable catch, but you look at Article 69 and Article 70. So on the box on the left, you have another two requirements. Article 69, you have to look at the right of landlocked states. So for instance, if one particular country in our region, say, Indonesia or Malaysia, wants to give access to Thailand or Vietnam, then we have to look at the rights of Laos. Okay. And then Article 70, the right of geographically disadvantaged states. Probably, I don't know, Singapore comes in play. So it is not automatic that suddenly we can just give out the fish to other states, but there are requirements on Article 62.2 that a coastal state have to look at it. Now, once you pass that hurdle of taking care Article 69 and 70 as a legal requirement of 62.2, then you go to another set of relevant factors that you need to take into account. So there are four key issues there. There is the issue of significance of living resources in the area of the coastal state and its other national interests. It's very interesting to read 62.3. It says, the coastal state shall take into account all relevant factors. The point number one is the significance of the living resources of the area to the economy of the coastal state concerned and its other national interests. UNCLOS does not define what are the other national interests. It's up to the discretions of the coastal state. So actually, its other national interests, in my view, can be military, strategics, especially if you're looking at South China Sea today. So you cannot just give out fish in South China Sea, in my opinion, if you have a strategic rivalry between two great powers where one of the power in this strategic rivalry are using militia fishermen in trying to exert its other strategic interest other than getting fish. So that comes into play Indonesia's other national interest. So this is a very broad definitions under the Convention Law of the Sea, and we can put anything inside it as long as legitimate. And I believe military rights, strategic rights, security rights, it's a very strategic and legitimate national interest of a coastal state. And then Article 62.3 again refers to 69 and 70, okay? And then it also refers to other countries in the regions. And then very importantly is to take into account whose nationals have habitually fished in the zone, meaning the coastal people right has to be taken into account. So 62.3 again give a very clear responsibilities before you can actually enter into those different factors in allowing foreigners to fish in your waters. Then on the top right below, you have Article 62.4. This is even more, I would say, difficult requirements to fill in. You have 12 rules there. So all these foreign vessels, when they are fishing in other countries' waters, in whatever form, whether it's joint venture or nationalizations or through access agreement, there are 12 different rules that you have to fulfill. And it ranges from licensing of fishermen, determining the species which may be caught, seasons regulations, fixing the age and the size of the fish and the other species, authorization and control of coastal states' conduct, placing observers or trainers on board of such vessels by coastal states. So it's a must. Landing in the ports of the coastal states, it's a must. In terms of condition of GV or other cooperative arrangement, that is very clear. It's a host of different issues that needs to be fulfilled. And then you go to 62.5, which is a catch-all rules where coastal states shall give due notice, conservations, and management laws and regulations. So if you read Article 62 comprehensively, then the message is only one: no fishing from foreign vessels in your waters. The way I look at this is that I'm not so sure whether a coastal state can actually fill in specificity of all those requirements in Article 61, 62.2, 69.70, and then 62.3. How do you define your other national interests? 62.4 and 62.5. So this is, I think, the way we should read the Article 62 of Convention Law of the Sea. This is the way to read it correctly, in my view. So any policy making in any coastal states, in order to allow foreign vessels to enter into your water, you have to have all of this. Otherwise, it's not in line with the Convention Law of the Sea. So this is one aspect. There's another aspect, the last part, which is okay. The second part is about fishery subsidies. Okay, so on one hand, Conventional Law of the Sea provides legal framework for countries to enter into agreement on the access of fisheries responsibly. Okay, which I've mentioned that the requirement is actually very, very tough. Okay. But on the other hand, we see that very powerful economic countries provide 90%, provide 58% of the total subsidies in fisheries. And this is the latest number that I've come from research lately, and this research came from different analysis from OECD, from FAO, from the World Bank. So the number is now $35.4 billion in 2018, and a majority is on the capacity. So the so-called capacity, actually fuel subsidies, no taxation, all kind of subsidies being given to the fishermen of China, EU, the US, Korea, and Japan. And Unfortunately, these subsidies are allowed under the WTO, and at the same time, SDG 14 specifically says that subsidy must be removed by 2020. And 2020 will go away in just 2 months. So I think SDG 14, particularly on subsidy issue, will be clearly failed in fulfilling its political statement and political goal. And we understand that in WTO in 2001, they recognized the reform of fishing subsidies, and today is 2020, and you see the number, they're not reducing, maybe a little bit, but they still exist. And we need also to see the European Union voting on subsidies that they will come out at the end of this month. The total subsidies on fisheries and on farming was somewhere around 60 billion euros. So we don't know how much it will go into fishery. And I think subsidy is one of the biggest problems that we face in fighting the illegal fishing. So we may be strongly fighting illegal fishing nationally on our waters. We might be fighting in the different regions in the Indian Ocean and in the Pacific, in West Africa and in East Africa, in different parts of the world. We may be discussing illegal fishing in FAO. We may be discussing about the lofty goal of fighting IUF in UN SDG, but WTO is there. They are not doing anything. They of course argue that they do something about it, but they basically, in my view, they didn't do anything. And you know, our individual country and collective efforts to fight IUF is not going anywhere, I would say, because this is the real culprit, and this is the missing link, and this is where we have to fight in the future in the WTO. So IUU fishing is not just illegal fishing activity, but it goes across the board. WTO, criminalities, all this different stuff that actually complicate illegal fishing. It is difficult to, it's really difficult a job, because unlike terrestrials aspect, you can see forest burning, you can see terrestrial degradations of our environment, but fish, we don't see them. You go out to the sea and you just see waters, there's no fish, there's no evidence, you feel it's okay. You look at the paper, everything is all right, but no, not really. It's far from that, and I believe, without doing anything in WTO, a fight of IUF, it's going to be, I'm so sorry to say, but I'm rather pessimistic, it's a limited effect. That is the most diplomatic word I can came up. Other word is useless. So you choose. Thank you.
Baik, terima kasih banyak Pak Hafaz. Jadi banyak sekali poin-poin penting yang dapat kita pelajari dari penjelasan Pak Hafaz, khususnya bagaimana kita dapat benar-benar mengartikan ketentuan pasal 62 UNCLOS dan menerjemahkannya ke konteks negara yang bersangkutan dan dengan mempertimbangkan kondisi nasional. Negara yang dapat diberikan akses pun juga bahkan ada pengaturannya dalam UNCLOS. Pak Hafaz tadi juga sampaikan bahwa melihat ketentuan-ketentuan tersebut tidak mudah coastal state untuk memenuhi persyaratan pasal 61, pasal 62, dan pasal-pasal terkait lainnya. Perlu diperhatikan bahwa implementasi dari pasal 61 atau conservation measures ini merupakan prasyarat dari pasal 62. Pak Hafaz, mungkin agar kita bisa mendapatkan gambaran yang lebih jelas dengan contoh, saya ada pertanyaan, Pak. Jadi apakah kondisi perikanan nasional yang statusnya itu overexploited itu dapat menjadi salah satu pertimbangan bahwa negara itu belum sepenuhnya mengimplementasikan pasal 61. Jadi sehingga dapat dikatakan tidak bijak atau tidak bisa gitu untuk memberikan akses ZEE ke kapal ikan asing berdasarkan pasal 62.
Yeah, it's true that the domestic condition of coastal state, which is not in a good conditions, where if you have a scientific evidence that the number of fisheries is dwindling and is overexploited, or you have other aspect of climate change, for instance, that impacted the fisheries, destructions of mangrove, for instance, or destructions of the coral reef that creates a reduction of fisheries. These are all aspects that needs to be taken care of before you are embarking even into a discussions with allowing foreign countries to come in. So that is why what I'm saying is that the requirements of Article 62, it's so difficult. And I think the idea in the first place was to balance the interest of those who used to fish in the high seas, but at the same time to protect the interest of the developing countries or the coastal countries. The mostly are developing countries that have these resources to be protected.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Hafaz. Kita akan berdiskusi lagi dengan Pak Hafaz nanti di sesi tanya jawab. Saya juga lihat sudah ada beberapa pertanyaan yang masuk. Nanti akan kami sampaikan di sesi tanya jawab untuk dijawab oleh Pak Hafaz. Selanjutnya saya akan mempersilahkan narasumber selanjutnya, yaitu Profesor Warwick Gullett from Wollongong University yang akan berbicara mengenai pasal 62 UNCLOS dari sudut pandang pemerintah Australia, khususnya mengenai penutupan atau pembukaan akses bagi pihak asing terhadap sumber daya perikanan di Australia. Professor Gullett, the time is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, and indeed good evening and good morning. We have people coming from many time zones. Here in Australia, it's around 5:30 in the evening. And I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to participate in this discussion as Indonesia grapples with a very important question about whether and how to allow foreign fishers access to any potential surplus fish stocks in Indonesia's EEZ. First, I'd like to say I'm delighted that my talk is following that of His Excellency Ambassador Havas, who's just given a fantastic discussion on the fisheries provisions in the Law of the Sea Convention. And I agree with his interpretation of them, and in particularly reading those provisions and coming to the conclusion that it's largely a broad discretion that's been given to coastal states about how they go about their decision about whether to allow foreign states access to any surplus stocks. And I'd actually like to add to that point towards the end of my talk. But I've been asked to address a number of specific questions about how Australia goes about this task of considering its obligation under UNCLOS Article 62 about whether it allows foreign fishers to fish in its EEZ. So I've got a presentation, so I will, in just a moment, share the screen for that. Just give me a moment. I think here we go. I think it's a screen. So please let me know if you can see. Can you see my PowerPoint slide, the first slide there, Stephanie? Okay, great. So I've been asked to address a series of questions, so I've got some slides to assist with this. So the first question was simply, does the Australian government currently allow foreign fishing in the Australian EEZ? And of course, it does so in accordance with Article 62 of the Law of the Sea Convention. And the answer is no. there is currently no authorised foreign commercial fishing in Australian waters, and the basis for that is Australia's assessment of its fisheries essentially all being at fully fished by the domestic industry, meaning there is no capacity. So the answer to that question is no, but with supplementary questions, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. I will note, however, that there are foreigners entitled to fish in areas of Australian waters in limited circumstances. So this is a slightly different point, but just for completeness, especially with all our Indonesian friends. So there is traditional fishing allowed by Indonesians in an area around what Australia calls Ashmore Reef or Pulau Pasar in Indonesian under a bilateral agreement. So that's a small area where traditional fishing is allowed. A similar type arrangement.
Professor Gullet, I'm sorry, but your slide is not in full screen yet. It's not in slideshow yet.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Stephanie, for...
We can see the slides, but we are now looking at all the 11 slides.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. I've obviously shared the wrong screen. I'll try to correct that. Okay. Actually, I will just try and check whether I can. Okay, I might need to show it in a slightly different. Let's try this screen. Do you now see my full slides or not?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie, for letting me know. I apologise for that. I've just noted a couple of areas where we do have other foreigners fishing in Australian waters. So that's a small example for traditional Indonesian fishers near Ashmore Reef. A similar arrangement with Papua New Guinea fishers in a complicated area of the Torres Strait between Australia and PNG. And also, again, a different sort of situation, Indonesian fishers fishing in the Indonesian EZ in the areas where the Indonesian EZ overlaps the Australian continental shelf. So a complicated border arrangement there. And I've just made another point here, something for us to consider if foreign fishers are allowed to come into Australia, how we go about determining that and whether a foreign fishing vessel can be permitted to be an Australian boat for the purpose of Australian law, and that happens from time to time. The last time was in 2015. But currently the answer to this question is no. Australia does not permit any commercial fishing by foreigners in the presently, and it's been that way for about 20 years. My second question was this: well, what is the Australian legislation that deals with this matter? So we do have the ability under the Australian law to grant licenses to foreign fishers. So the law is in place, ready to go if we do allow it, and that's under our main fisheries legislation at the Commonwealth level, at the federal level, the Fisheries Management Act. A very long piece of legislation, about 500 pages, supported by a similar length of regulations. And we have a series of other pieces of fisheries legislation. This is the main one. So I'm just providing the section here, which does provide an ability to grant a foreign fishing license. So my next question was, how does Australia...
Sorry, Professor. The slide is not moving. We're still in slide 2 right now.
How about that?
Yeah, now we're in slide 3.
Okay, thank you. I've also got a confusion how my slides are working here. Thank you, Stephanie. So you're looking at one that says, explain how Australia establishes a TAC? Yes, thank you. So Australia has I think a very good comprehensive fisheries management framework with detailed legislation, and it establishes a comprehensive regime for each of its fisheries. And the relevant body is AFMA, the Australian Fisheries Management Authority, and it undertakes a lot of work assessing stocks on an annual basis and determining what the catch level will be or what the fishing effort will be. And that its approach is supported by quite detailed policies and guidelines, the principal one being the harvest strategy policy. And essentially the goals of the fisheries legislation Sustainability of fisheries is an important objective, but it's not the only one. Fisheries legislation tends to be different from environmental legislation, which is just focusing on the environment. Fisheries legislation is focusing on the environment, plus also trying to enable the fishing industry to continue. So there's an essential balance between what amount of fishing can take place that's going to be environmentally sustainable, with the goal of also of allowing fishing rather than simply stopping fishing. So there's a potentially tension between the environmental policy and the maximising economic benefit of fishery policy, but that's the main approach the Fisheries Department takes. And it assesses what's needed for the particular stock in question in the different fisheries, looking at the total biomass, looking at how it can recover depleted stocks, looking at interactions with threatened species. And so the manner in which it sets a TAC for different fisheries or particular stocks is different depending on the type of fish being targeted in the different fisheries, but the goal is overall the same. And there's a lot of data that's shared. I've just given another dot point here of the southern bluefin tuna fishery to illustrate another complication, that we're talking about setting a TAC for stocks within Australia's EZ, but some of those stocks don't just stay in the EZ, they are a transboundary stock. And an important stock here is SPT, and that's managed internationally. So there's an international convention or regional convention that sets a global catch for that species and then sets a national allocation that then Australia needs to implement under its national law. So some stocks are purely within Australian jurisdiction, some go beyond into international waters, and so there could be different international arrangements for those stocks that then needs to be implemented domestically. So say for the southern bluefin tuna case, the global catch is set, an allocation is set to Australia, and then Australia will then work out how it implements that catch. I've just noted that one issue here, that Australia is essentially adopting a 5% reduction of its national allocation in order to take into account the amount of stock taken by recreational fishers, so it's not entirely taken by commercial fishers. And there's a lot of uncertainty about how much is taken by recreational fishers. So this is a way to try to take that into account. Now, moving to the next slide, hopefully that just worked. Moving on to this question, explain how Australia determines that it has the capacity or doesn't have the capacity to harvest the entire total allowable catch. So the first thing is working out what is a catch, and secondly, do we have the capacity to reach that? That's an obligation under the convention. Well, this is a bit trickier to work out. Historically, the concern in Australia has been overcapacity rather than undercapacity. And Australia, like some other jurisdictions, has tried hard to address this by coming up with measures to encourage fishers in overfished fisheries to exit the industry. And a large program was launched in 2005 federally to provide financial incentives and training incentives for fishers in overfished fisheries to exit the industry in order to decrease the capacity. Australia has, I think, a very strict regulatory regime for fisheries. Most of the fisheries, we could say, would actually be allocating all the available TAC to existing license holders or those that have the statutory fishing rights under the legislation. And moving on this point, it is interesting to look at this important question, because sometimes we could have a situation where it turns out after assessing a fishery season that not the entire stock has been taken. And so I've just noted a couple from recent assessments provided for the last fishing season. So for example, the squid fishery, where in the last season, only 65 tonnes of the available 3,000 tonnes was taken. And the understanding of this is that it's quite difficult to work out where the squid are aggregating in order for them to be efficiently taken. So we could set a TAC, but in a particular fishing season, maybe that entire TAC is not taken. It may be completely different the next season due to the nature of that stock. I've noted in one of our important fisheries, the Eastern tuna and billfish fishery, less than half the catch limit set for albacore and big-eyed tuna were caught. for that last season, and that potentially could lead to a higher TAC being set for the next year, and to provide more opportunities for the existing license holders to access those fish. Another interesting one is Skipjack Tuner. Basically, there's been a TAC set for that species, but there hasn't been any targeted effort by the license holders for that species, largely due to things such as a lot of uncertainty about the location of the species, variation between years, the low value of the species. So this is potentially a bit of a concern that we have a species that there's still uncertainty about, but a quota is set and it's not being met, even though it's been allocated to Australian fishers. They just haven't focused on doing that. They've been focusing on other species. So the quota has been allocated. Moving on to the next slide. This is an easy question to answer. A point that's come up in the previous discussion about the consideration provided in UNCLOS to landlocked states and geographically disadvantaged states. I'd say this is not applicable to Australia because we're in a situation we do not provide any. Our conclusion is there is no surplus for foreign fishers, so we don't go into the issue about how we would access open or close. And here's a slide about landlocked states and geographically disadvantaged states. We do not have a specific provision in our fisheries legislation to give effect to this provision in UNCLOS, but it doesn't matter. Australia being under a common law approach for its legal framework, even though we're bound by the law of the sea convention, it's not automatically a case that those provisions become incorporated into national law. We'll go about doing that how we see fit. Our approach would be that our law is consistent with the convention, but it doesn't mean that we're taking exactly the same words from the convention. So if it came to pass that Australia realises it has a surplus and would open that to foreign fishers, then Australia would be well placed to give consideration to this matter that's specified in Article 62. But we do not have a specific provision that mentions it. I've been asked to explain the current status of Australian fish stocks, whether they're underexploited or exploited sustainably or overexploited. And I'm happy to report that the fisheries assessments are very positive for all of Australia's centrally managed fisheries. So the latest information is that the last 7 years, that all the fisheries managed by AFMA, managed solely by AFMA as within Commonwealth jurisdiction, were assessed as being not subject to overfishing. Now, that doesn't mean to say there aren't any concerns. So overall, the fisheries may have this assessment, but there could be some stocks within those fisheries that there is greater concern about. I'd say southern bluefin tuna is always going to be one of those. We also have concern about striped marlin and yellowfin tuna, which are also fished beyond Australia, that they are both considered subject to overfishing by fishing mortality and overfished by the basis of biomass. So we still have concerns about particular species. Now I was asked to consider the question, what are the determining factors of Australia's fish stock status? So reaching the conclusion that the last 7 years, all the fisheries seem to be managed in a good way, with the stocks not considered to be overfished, whereas previously they were in that situation. Well, I think the reason we've got this result is the extensive work that's gone into this by the Fisheries Management Agency. An incredible amount of effort over many years. I would say a largely well-resourced agency, and one that operates on the basis of the cost recovery principle, so that the fishers who are being managed are contributing to the management costs. And there's so much that is done that's all transparent, publicly available. The assessments, the ability for scientists to be involved, for the industry to be involved. And also, I'd say a key point here is that the management of the fisheries is subject to oversight from another government agency, the Environment Department. So I mentioned before about some differences in the legislative objectives for fisheries legislation as opposed to environmental legislation. All the Australian fisheries for which the fishers seek to export product which is just about all the fisheries, that the need to have export approval triggers our environmental legislation, the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, which says anything in that situation has to go through a strategic environmental assessment. And what this means is that the management arrangements that have been developed by the fisheries agency are then subject to review under the environmental legislation. So it's another layer of review of the adequacy of the arrangements under the fisheries legislation. And I'd call that the arm's length review. And we also have special attention given to managing interactions with at-risk species. And the final question I had was, do I have any other important opinion that is relevant to this topic? And this is where I want to reflect back on Ambassador Havas's conclusion that it seems that reading the provisions of UNCLOS, he said something along the lines that it looks like there's no fishing for foreign vessels, really, unless a coastal state really wants to do that along those lines. And I think a key point to look at here is that even though Article 62 it's got very strong words that a coastal state shall give the surplus, allow a foreign state to access any surplus, there's little a foreign state could do if it's not given access. Because even though we have a remarkable feature of the UNCLOS is the compulsory dispute resolution procedures, the crucial question about a coastal state determining its total allowable catch is removed from those provisions. So look at the Law of the Sea Convention. If we jump to Article 297, subsection 3A, this is talking about the compulsory dispute resolution procedures of the provision. They exist except that the coastal state shall not be obliged to accept the submission to such settlement of any dispute relating to its sovereign rights with respect to the living resources in the EEZ, including its discretionary powers for determining the allowable catch, its harvesting capacity, and allocation of the surplus. So, and this comes back to Ambassador Havas's final point, that try to understand this provision. It's looking at the history, trying to balance the rights of distant water fishing nations at the time the convention was drafted and coastal states. Because prior to the convention, the area of the EEZ that we're talking about was high seas. So foreign fishers had unlimited rights to fish in those waters. And now the coastal state's jurisdiction has extended to those 200 odd miles. And that had the effect of pushing out the distant water fishing nations. So they were concerned if they were going to be pushed out of these otherwise productive fisheries waters, well, they don't want those fish going to waste. So if there is a surplus, the coastal state should allow them access. So that's the key provision in Article 62. But because this decision would be fraught with difficulty, it's been removed from the compulsory dispute resolution procedure. So we have a strong obligation, but little a foreign state can do if they want to challenge it. I would say it's not impossible to challenge it, but essentially what we'd be looking at is that a coastal state has not implemented the convention in good faith. If it has set a TAC arbitrarily low simply to exclude foreign fishers, if it's not based on any credible science, I think that could be a basis. But if it can point to plausible scientific basis for not allowing foreign fisheries for different concerns, even national interest concerns, then I don't think a foreign state could do anything about it. So that's an interesting issue to look at. And my very final point is that the head of AFMA is aware of this issue that we have at the moment, that some of our TAC is not being fully fished, mainly because it's not commercially viable, and about whether there's interest or ability to allow foreigners in for that part and how they can arrange it. Anyway, I realise I've gone a little bit over time, so I'll finish there, and thank you for inviting me for this talk.
Thank you very much, Professor Warwick. Dari penjelasan Professor Warwick, kita mendapatkan penjelasan mengenai kebijakan di Australia, di mana Australia tidak membuka akses kapal ikan asing, kecuali untuk traditional fishing di kondisi tertentu. Dan Professor Warwick juga menekankan pentingnya scientific evidence sebagai pertimbangan bagi kebijakan perikanan nasional di Australia, salah satunya untuk menutup akses bagi kapal ikan asing. Saya ada satu pertanyaan yang saya ingin tanyakan kepada Profesor Warwick. Apakah sebenarnya di Australia itu ada pertimbangan tertentu yang benar-benar digunakan oleh pemerintah Australia untuk tidak membuka aksesnya ke kapal ikan asing. Contohnya adalah untuk membangun industri domestik atau untuk memenuhi kebutuhan permintaan ikan yang tinggi di Australia. So, Professor Warwick, is there any other consideration that is being used by the government of Australia as a basis to not give access to foreign fishing fleets? For example, for the interest of prioritizing domestic industry, or probably to meet the demand for fish in Australia?
Thank you, Stephanie, for your question. No, I don't think there are sort of different hidden reasons for Australia's position. I think it is legitimately our fisheries, our domestic capacity is there to fish up to the sustainable limit for the TAC. But also recognising that the objectives for the fisheries legislation is partly to support the domestic industry. So I don't think there are other type of strategic interests considerations along the lines perhaps that Ambassador Harvas indicated could be available. I don't think they're necessary for Australia to consider at this stage because its domestic capacity is seen to be able to reach the TAC. And my understanding is from time to time, Australia does receive requests foreign fishers to access any potential surplus, and Australia politely writes back saying thank you for your interest, but our fisheries are fully fished. So I think that's really the extent of any sort of public discussion on that.
Thank you very much, Professor Warwick. Dan selanjutnya saya akan persilakan untuk pembicara yang ketiga, yaitu Profesor Francis Nuno dari University of Ghana. Jadi penjelasannya akan diberikan oleh Profesor Francis ini tidak akan jauh berbeda dengan penjelasan Profesor Warwick, namun kita akan mendengarkan dari perspektif negara Ghana. So, Professor, the time is yours. Hello? I'm sorry, I just realized that I was in mute.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all participants. I wish to thank the organizers for inviting me to be part of this. This is a very important subject, and for Ghana and for the whole world as well. I'm also very happy about the previous speakers. The previous speakers have set the tone for most of the things that we would like to talk about, especially the presentation by His Excellency Havas. The interpretation he gave to the UNCLOS is exactly what Ghana has, that it is very difficult to really allow foreign fishers into our country. So we actually don't allow foreign fishing straight away. We don't allow foreign fishing. But let me share my screen and then we go on. Share screen. Can you please see my screen?
Yep. It's showing.
Okay. All right. So for all right. So I present on Ghana's perspective to the UNCLOS Article 61. So for many of us who do not know where Ghana is, if you see Africa like a trigger, Africa like an AK-47, then Ghana is at the trigger side, just along the Gulf of Guinea. And we have a very small coastline of 550 kilometers. Fisheries is very big in Ghana. Over 10% of the population depends on fishing for a livelihood, and it contributes a lot of animal protein. It's animal protein in our diets. It's also a source of food security for many who do not have food, and it's a source of income for Ghana. So marine fishing is big in Ghana, and Ghanaians travel along the entire coast of Africa, especially West Africa, and help with fishing. We have three main sectors of the industry in Ghana. First, we have the artisanal fishing. Artisanal fishing that uses canoes, and there are over 12,000 of them. Then we have the inshore vessels. We call them the semi-industrial boats. The semi-industrial boats have inboard engines, and we have over 300 of them currently. Then we have the industrial fishing. The industrial fishing is made up of industrial trawlers, and then we have tuna vessels. Currently, we have 74 industrial trawlers. There are no shrimpers, and then we have about 60 tuna vessels. So the marine fishery comprises these various fishery target various resources. The artisanal targets small pelagics, that is small pelagic fishes. The tuna industry targets large pelagics, and then the industrial trawlers target demersal fishes. So these are some of the small pelagics, mainly sardinella and the mackerels, and then anchovy. Then we have the large pelagics, mainly the tuna, the swordfish, and the marlins, all being landed with a lot of bycatch of dolphin and other species. So that's the tuna industry. Then we have the demersals. The demersals are dominated mainly by groupers and then snappers and sea breams, and then a lot of soles and cuttlefish. We have quite a number of issues in the sector, especially in current period. We have a lot of excessive fishing effort. The ecosystem seems to be in trouble with lots of pollution coming from plastics and oil from land. And there's very little protection for marine biodiversity. The nation also believes that a lot of the money in the industry is going to foreigners, and I'll tell you why. And then there's increasing population along the coast of Ghana, and there's a lot of discarding of fish from the trawling industry. Okay, so let's go to the substantive issue. Ghana has what we call the Fisheries Act 202, and that is the main act that the nation draws on for managing the fish resource. So the first question, specific question I was given was, does the government allow foreign fishing in the EEZ according to the article? My direct answer is that no. No authorized fishing happens in Ghana. And mainly the idea is to build the domestic industry, as somebody suggested, and to make sure that the gains or the rent from the fishery accrue to Ghanaians. So the law, the Fisheries Act 625, I've quoted specific articles. Article 47 of it gives conditions under which any industrial fishing or semi-industrial fishing can happen in Ghana. It must be owned or controlled by a citizen of Ghana or the government, and must be registered in law in Ghana as a place of business, and the benefits shall accrue to government or the citizens or a public corporation established by law in Ghana. In the case of tuna, at least 50% of the shares should be owned by Ghanaians and registered in Ghana. Currently, what happens is that according to Article 47(1)(a), which is on your screen, Ghanaians front for foreign businesses. So these foreign businesses are registered in Ghana as owned by Ghanaians. But then we have the foreigners behind it. So Ghanaians front and allow foreign vessels to take the resources away from Ghana. So they are, if you go behind and check the documentation of the company, it is registered and owned by a Ghanaian. Everything, all the documentation, everything shows that it is owned by a Ghanaian. I'll tell you something else. The law also, Article 50, states that the crew, at least the crew should also, the crew including the master, the officers, and everybody, at least 70% of them shall be Ghanaians. Yes, that is true, but you have those doing hard labor being Ghanaians, and then the master and authorities, the chief officer and all being foreigners. And the law stipulates a fine of not less than $1,000, and on second offense, $2 million. So $1 million and then $2 million as offense. But this is not deterrent at all. Now, fishing from foreign vessels. The law specifically says that a foreign vessel shall not fish or attempt to fish in our waters. So the law forbids, except by under access agreement. So except under access agreement. And since the coming into force of the Fisheries Act 202, Ghana has not signed any access agreement with any foreign government. So since 2002, Ghana has not been in any foreign access agreement with any government. So these are the conditions also for having an access agreement. So all the conditions are stipulated, and I believe that they are said that no foreign company, especially under the Article 61 and 62 and 69, will be able to achieve it. So there are no access agreements currently in Ghana. So the question asks to explain legislation in Ghana on this matter, and that is what I've provided under the Fisheries Act 202 above. So we don't have any total allowable catch yet in place. From all that I've said, there's no total allowable catch set for any foreign vessel. Of course, there is no foreign fishing in Ghana. There is no foreign fishing in Ghana, at least on paper. So the question is, explain how Ghana determined that it has capacity or no capacity to harvest entire allowable catch. From the foregoing, this is not applicable in the Ghanaian case. Nevertheless, as a country, we conduct annual stock assessment under the EAF Nansen project. Using the Fridge of Nansen vessel, we also have an observer scheme in place on all industrial vessels, including trawlers and tuna, and we collect catch and effort data, and we also compare them with vessel logbook data. I have a current publication on this, which we can Google and read about it. Then we have ongoing data collection along the coast, selected landing sites also for the artisanal fishery. So some data is being collected, and we are supposed to rely on this data for our management. So what are the other factors regarding opening and closing of the fishing? This question is also not applicable to us because, like I said, there's no foreign fishing in Ghana. Explain fisheries legislation in Ghana has specific provisions regarding, that is also, we don't have any such provisions in our laws. There's no such provisions in our laws. Explain the status of your fish stock under those headings, and the few slides below gives the status of the fish stocks. The stocks, all of them are virtually overexploited. So this is the catch and effort data for the artisanal fisheries, and you see the fluctuating trend. The effort is the thick line on top, and the catch is the one below. So you can see the effort outstripping the catch. The catch per unit effort is low in the artisanal fishery, making life difficult for artisanal fishers. We have similar trend also for the inshore fishery. The effort is the bold line, and then the catch is the slightly less bold line. So you can see, but overall the catch per unit effort is low, also in the inshore fishery. Then we have the industrial fishery. We have similar trends also in the industrial fishery. Recently, I'm a member of the Scientific and Technical Working Group for Ghana's fisheries. I'm also the immediate past Chief Director of the Ministry of Fisheries, so I have access to modeling data. So this is the data from the Schaefer and Fox surplus models for the artisanal industry, and it is clear that there's overcapacity in the fisheries. We have more canoes than can be sustained, and we are fishing beyond the MSY. So if you see the curve here, for the artisanal industry, we are fishing beyond the MSY, according to Schaefer's and according even to the Fox curve. If you go to the inshore fishery, there's a similar trend. There's more effort than the fishery can sustain. And if you go into the curve as well, we are fishing beyond the MSY. So the fishery is under a declining trend. Same with the Fox curve. If you go to the industrial fishery, we have a similar trend. There are more trawlers in the fishing industry than can be sustained by the fishing, using over 20 years of data. So similarly, we are fishing around and beyond the MSY using the surplus curve, and for the Fox curve, we are fishing at the MSY. This is no good news for Ghana. The industry is very stressed. It's very stressed. So what are the determining factors of your fish stock status? Small pelagic stocks are overexploited. Demersal stocks are overexploited. Large pelagics such as tuna are fully exploited, and it is being managed by ICAT. And there are two main factors. There's lack of enforcement of the legislation in all the fisheries. There's quite a lot of IUU going on. People using chemicals, people using lights, explosives, etc. to fish. And we have a very damaging fishing in Ghana called Seiko fishing. And I have a number of articles online that we can read about it, where trash fish is a treasure to people. What is happening is that vessels go alongside trawlers and take up their bycatch and discards and bring them to land, freeze them and bring them to land. So we have quite a number of large boats going out there not to fish, but to collect the bycatch and discards and bring them to land. The industrial trawlers are using very tiny mesh size at their cord end, at their bag. So they virtually scrape the waters and take virtually everything, destroying the habitat and destroying the ecosystem and throwing quite a lot away, and the vessels only go for few and bring them to land. There is also extreme political interference preventing enforcement of sanctions on corporate vessels. So vessels are able to get away. And in fact, some of the vessels are owned by political leaders anyway. So you have a situation where you get the vessels and the judicial committee cannot apply the relevant sanctions. So there's no deterrence, and the vessels keep on flouting. So there's always a conflict between the artisanal fishers and the industrial fishers, each one blaming each other for destruction of the stocks. So currently, our Fisheries Act 202 is under review. A draft has been submitted to Cabinet, and there's quite a lot of discussion ongoing nationally about the reduction of IUU and the fact that the original intention is to bring the rent or the income from the fishery to Ghanaians is not being achieved by the current law. And so the artisanal fishers and the industrial fishers are virtually at war. The operators are not happy because they are being blamed for what is happening on land. And this is no good news for Ghana. The resources is in distress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Dan hal yang menurut saya perlu ditekankan dari penjelasan Profesor Francis adalah bahwa Ghana tidak membuka akses untuk kapal ikan asing dengan pertimbangan untuk membangun industri domestik dan untuk memastikan sumber daya perikanan yang ada di Ghana itu dimanfaatkan untuk rakyat Ghana. Namun walaupun sudah ditutup, tetap ada modus yang menggunakan shell companies di mana pelaku usaha di luar negeri itu menjadi beneficial owner atau owner yang sesungguhnya. Professor, do you think that this practice, foreign owners using shell companies in Ghana to exploit successfully fisheries resources in Ghana, do you think that is the main factor of the declining fish stocks or sizes experienced by Ghana?
Please come again. I didn't hear the question quite well, the beginning of the question.
Yeah. So do you think the practice of foreign owners using shell companies in Ghana to exploit fisheries resources in Ghana is actually the main factor of the declining fish stock experienced by Ghana?
Yes, I think so, because they don't have really a sense of belonging, and they are fishing contrary to the laws of the nation. The mesh sizes are not good. The opening of the gear is not good. So every fish literally has no chance of survival. They sort of destroying, and they have these vessels at sea, sometimes 3 months, stay out there and keep just destroying, taking everything. Trawling is a very dangerous type of fishing that can go on. And in fact, the fact that you are using tiny mesh size, and the vessels are the gears are very huge, the size of about 3 to 4 football fields. And the opening of the gear is a big, they are all big vessels with very strong gross tonnage. And the license fee that Ghana gets from them is very small, $135 per gross registered tonnage. It's so small. The license fee is not enough. It's not enough. Thank you.
Ya, thank you very much, Professor. Hal yang ingin kembali saya tekankan adalah bahwa yang Profesor Francis sampaikan, pelaku usaha dari luar negeri itu umumnya itu tidak memiliki sense of belonging terhadap fisheries resources di daerah tempat ia menangkap gitu, jika di luar dari wilayah negaranya. Baik, banyak sekali yang kita dapatkan dari narasumber hari ini, dan selanjutnya saya akan persilakan Bapak Andreas Aditya Salim dari Indonesia Ocean Justice Initiative untuk membacakan pernyataan tertulis dari Kementerian Perikanan New Zealand. Waktu saya persilakan.
Terima kasih, Stephanie. I'll read the statement from the New Zealand in English. So this statement is prepared by Mr. Gary Orr. He is the Director of Compliance Services from the Ministry of Primary Industries in New Zealand, which is responsible for fisheries. Since the 1960s, the deep water areas of New Zealand had been exploited by foreign vessels. Afterwards, in 1978, the government of New Zealand declared its 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. Internationally, as in New Zealand, the introduction of this zone was driven by countries wanting to protect their fish stocks from foreign fishing vessels and manage it by themselves. As the Chatham Island and other outlying island is included in New Zealand's territory, the total area of New Zealand's water is the 4th largest fishing zone in the world, which is around 4 million square kilometers. In October 1986, after 2 years consultation, the quota management system was introduced, which then established the quota management areas for each species, setting catch limits for those species in each QMA, quota management areas. The QMS, quota management system, allowed the New Zealand to bring into effect the provisions of Articles 61 and 62 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea by setting the total allowable commercial catch, TACC, limit for commercial fish species, which ensured the sustainability of the fish stocks under management. Article 62 of UNCLOS requires a coastal state to determine its capacity to harvest the living resources within its EEZ, and where it is not able to do so, it is required via various instruments to give other states access. Section 20 of the Fisheries Act of 1996 provides for the setting of the TACC. New Zealand did not initially have sufficient vessels to harvest the TACC, and legislation was introduced to allow joint venture arrangements where New Zealand companies chartered foreign flag vessels to fish in New Zealand waters, with both companies sharing the profits. This ensured that New Zealand met the requirements of Article 62 of UNCLOS and was able to therefore deny access by the fishing vessels of other states to its exclusive economic zone unless they were party to a charter agreement. Part 5, Section 81 to 83 of the Fisheries Act of 1996 sets out the provisions for calculation and apportionment of foreign allowable catch for foreign vessels, whilst Section 83 sets out the provisions for the issuing licenses. The fact that New Zealand had capacity to catch the TACC means that no foreign fishing licenses were issued, apart from the rare occasions involving US vessels in accordance with the 1987 Multilateral Fisheries Treaty with the states in the Forum Fisheries Agency, otherwise known as the South Pacific Tuna Treaty. In 2011, a ministerial inquiry was launched by the government of New Zealand into the operation of foreign chartered vessels in the New Zealand's exclusive economic zone after allegations of labor abuse and maritime safety issues. As a result of the inquiry, a legislation was introduced that stipulates foreign flag fishing vessels would no longer be permitted to operate within the EEZ, as their flag status means that they were not subject to New Zealand's law in relation to labor and safety. The legislation required these kind of vessels to reflect to New Zealand when operating under charter or a joint venture, thereby being subject to New Zealand domestic legislation and improving the working conditions and wages of foreign nationals working as crew on these vessels. As a consequence, all vessels that are fishing within the New Zealand exclusive economic zone are flagged to New Zealand, and there are no foreign fishing vessels operating in New Zealand waters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jadi itu adalah pernyataan tertulis dari perwakilan Kementerian Perikanan New Zealand. Selanjutnya saya akan membuka sesi tanya jawab. Saya akan bacakan beberapa pertanyaan yang sudah ada. Yang pertama adalah pertanyaan untuk Professor Warwick. So, Professor, this is a question for you from Muhammad Anwari. So I'm gonna read the question. You said that there needs to be a synergy between scientists and industry to produce proper regulation. So my question is whether in this integration process, the political influence is also a strong consideration. Whether there is a strong influence politically. And what is the specific strategy that can reduce this strong political influence in achieving the synergy between scientists and industry?
Thank you for that question. So I guess what we're always hoping for is sound decision making in fisheries management, and so there needs to be a lot of considerations and thinking about the environmental sustainability of the fishery, and making sure we can still have fishing continue provided that it's sustainable. And my view of the way that decision making is done in Australia, by and large, that decisions are made on a sound basis without strong influence from politics. And the structure for that we have in Australia, and Australia is not alone in this type of structure, that for each fishery, there is that's run by the Fisheries Department. They are informed by a management advisory committee. And so that committee it's interesting what sort of powers they have. It's really just an advisory committee, but the representation on that committee is broad. So it's always important to have fishers represented. They're the best ones to know the practices going on in our fishing, and especially if we've had a move to statutory fishing rights, that they have got long-term financial interest in the viability of the fishery. So fishers' views on these advisory committees is very important. But that's not the only view. We have environmentalists and scientists appointed to those bodies, and they go through carefully looking at what the Fisheries Department has done and provide advice that helps reach a well-informed decision. So obviously, from time to time, there will be decisions made that seem to have a political influence, because at the end of the day, with our structure, the person in charge right at the top is the Fisheries Minister, who is a politician. And from time to time, there are decisions which could go either way, where maybe strong industry representation has led to a decision to allow a fishery to expand or in a certain way. So from time to time, there is that concern that politics has intruded into decision making. But at the end of the day, the politician is also accountable to the people. So we can look at it that way. So I think our structure is good. You've got a sort of an arm's length away from politics decision-making by a fisheries department that's informed by key stakeholders, including the industry, but also others who don't have a financial stake in it. And there's oversight by an elected politician. So I think that structure is a good structure.
Thank you very much, Professor Warwick. So the next question is for Pak Hafaz. Pak Hafaz, the question is, so what are the steps or processes that Indonesia have to take before making a decision to open or close the country's fisheries for foreign fishing fleets? And how will the abolishment of Komnas Kajiskan, the National Fish Stock Assessment Commission, in the job creation law affect such process?
I have another slide I want to share, just a simple slide. Hang on a second. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
So this is the world's fisheries conditions. This is based on the latest report of the FAO. So 60% of the world fishery is already fully exploited or fully fished, and 32% is already overexploited and overfished, and underexploited is just 7%. So if you are talking about fisheries, you should look at the global fisheries. It's not just national policy fisheries, because some of the large species like tuna, they are moving from one space to another space, from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction, from one EEZ to another EEZ, from high seas to EEZ, from EEZ to high seas. So it's a very complicated pattern, and we can see clearly that 93% of the world fish is already overfished. So I think that should be the frame of our thinking, first and foremost, before we are even thinking of allowing foreign vessels to fish in our waters. Then the question is, if the world fish is not overfished, why foreign vessels want to fish in our waters? They can fish somewhere else. They can fish in the high seas where they are allowed to fish. They can fish in part of the Pacific. They can fish in part of the Indian Ocean that is not part of any EEZ. They can fish in the Atlantic. The reason they want to come into our waters because there are no more fish over there. They have taken all the fish over there. They have done the overfishing over there. So you cannot justify overfishing in one place and going to fish in our waters as a reasons to allow foreign fishing vessels, regardless of your capacity. You see, one of the big important issue that is in many discussions often not taken into account fully was that when we negotiated EEZ in 1973 all the way in 1982, there was no vessels that Professor Francis Nuno was mentioning. There was no vessels like the vessel that Indonesian government seized, MV Viking. Remember in 2016-17, there is now today there is one vessel that can carry fishing net as long as 399 kilometers. This vessel did not exist in 1973 when we were negotiating UNCLOS. So the context of fishery at that time and today is different. So I imagine if we are negotiating again, is that today, then Article 62 will be simply there is no foreign fishing vessel whatsoever. Because look at the state of the fisheries today, 93% of the global fish are already overfished. So I think it is a responsibility of each country to look after its own fisheries. So whether or not we have latest analysis, I think from this simple result from FAO is very clear that the global fish is already overfished. So you don't need to go into detail. I can assure you it's overfished already. I think each and every elements of Article 62 needs to be complied, not just about the total allowable catch assessment. That is important. What Professor Nuno mentioned was very important. Of course, Indonesia has the same thing. Many other countries has the same thing. Professor Warwick has the same thing. But I think the argument from Australian perspective is even more interesting, that if you take the essence of the Australian argument, in my interpretation, Prof, correct me if I'm wrong, is that regardless of the TAC, regardless of the acquisition of the fish, we want to fish it ourselves, full stop. The fact that at some point we are not able to fish ourselves now, it doesn't mean we are not able to fish in the future. So I think if we apply this argument to each country like Indonesia, we can say that maybe some analysis says that our TAC is quite high. Maybe we're not allowed to catch all the fish ourselves now, but that does not mean we will give it to foreign vessel. We should be able to think ourselves, how can we fish ourselves this TAC in the future? So, and then you have to link with the global conditions, because 70% of plus of our planet is water, and the fish are interconnected in one way or another. And I come to my earlier argument, if these foreign fishing vessels, they want to fish to our country, then the question is, why didn't you fish in the high seas? Because you have all the subsidy, you have all these big fish vessels. And the answer is, they've done all the killing in the high seas, and they are going to different countries, EEZ countries. And I think in many different parts of the world, that is a big challenge today. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Hafaz. There's actually another question for you, but I'm gonna go to Professor Francis at the moment. So Professor Francis, there's a question. How is the role of NGO related to fisheries management in your country?
Okay, the NGOs are very strong. We have what we call a Fisheries Alliance, made up of NGOs, various fisheries NGOs. There are about over 10 of them. You have EGF in Ghana, you have Hempuano, you have quite a number of them, in Ghana. And they are working behind the scenes, but let me say that the government is not listening to them. The fishing authority is not listening to them. And that is simple. They organize their meetings, they do all the talking, they are having press conferences. If you go online, there are so many press conferences and there are so many radio and television interviews. They have made documentaries. They are making quite a lot of noise, especially about illegal fishing and the dangers being caused by our Ghanaians who are fronting for the others. But the government is virtually not listening. That's all. The NGOs are doing their bit, but the government is not listening. Simple.
Thank you very much, Professor. So I'm going to go back to Pak Hafaz. Pak Hafaz, there's one question from Pak Basilio Dias Araujo. So Pak Basilio, please let me know if I understand the question correctly. So Indonesia is putting emphasis in more guarding, patrolling, and protecting the marine resources in Indonesian EEZ, rather than focusing on exploiting the resources. So is there any benefit from the market side for Indonesia, who spends huge amount, who invests so much in terms of money to protect the resources?
I think the question of law enforcement ability, law enforcement costs, it's separate, from the issue of market price of resources, because it's preemptive measures. And of course, the protections of the EEZ is not only for the purpose of the market value of the resources that we are protecting, but also for the environmental value and also for strategic security values. Because if you are well aware, of course, we have a different conditions than the Pacific and West Africa, or because we have the South China Sea issue. So the issue of fisheries in South China Sea is not pure fisheries. Is in relation with strategic rivalry, is in relations with strategic competitions, is in relations with different aspects that are more than just fishery. So I think this is one important aspect that we have to look at it. And secondly, in the context of illegal fishing, you are looking at not only illegal activities in fishery, but within the context of illegal fishing itself, we have evidence that there was drug running, there is drug smuggling, there is a gun running. So it is more than just the resources of fisheries itself. So I think it is very important to be in the perspective of the purpose that what we are doing in terms of strategic and security issue. Now, if we really want to do the mathematical aspect of that, we can do that exercise. You have to look at the law on the Indonesian environments, where we specifically mentioned in the government regulations what are the costs of marine destructions or environment destructions per square meters, for instance. So if you destroy a specific area of coral reef in some parts of Indonesia per square meters, then you have to pay such and such amount of US dollars. And this number has an international reference. We have seen different cases in different parts of the world where destructions of, for instance, coral reef per square meters, the cost will be somewhere around range between $1,500 to $5,000. So it ranges different situations. So if you look at it, just one aspect of it, it's already there is a monetary value, not just from the fish itself, but the environment value, the environment services that fisheries are providing and being provided as well. And if you want to do more mathematical analysis, then you can see how far the fisheries will impact on the aspect of coastal development. And there is a government policy that is very important, which is what we call the self-sufficiency, swasembada. Okay, so self-sufficiency is not only in the area of food, but also in the crops, but also on the fisheries as well. So if you start to do the mathematical analysis, then it will expand in such a huge way. But if you want to be specific on the patrolling, then the issue is illegality and strategic discussion. And I think there is more than just the value of the market of the fish itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Hafaz. We actually have Mr. Gary Orr from New Zealand right here with us. Thank you very much, sir, for the written statement. And do you probably have further explanation to add, or do you maybe want to answer the professor's questions?
Thank you very much. Yes, it was really interesting to listen to Professor Gillett. New Zealand and Australia have a very similar system of fisheries management and have taken a similar approach in terms of how we establish the total allowable commercial catch in our countries. Also found it very interesting listening to Professor Nuno as well about Ghana and the challenges faced with the actual beneficial ownership of corporate structures where you allow foreign companies into your country. We have had the 51% arrangement as well, where foreign nationals could only own 49% of any fishing company. And that did cause some issues, but what we've found is that as we moved to establish all fishing vessels in New Zealand being New Zealand flagged, that's changed the type of vessel that we're now getting. A number of countries refuse to allow their vessels to reflag to New Zealand, so they no longer come here. We don't get squid jiggers in New Zealand for that very reason. Our squid fishery is now purely a trawl fishery. We have a reduced number of tuna longliners, and as such, that's allowed an opportunity for New Zealand fishers to develop that fishery as well. So the way we've established our catch limits is about providing maximum economic benefit to New Zealand and to New Zealanders. And they can achieve that either through establishment of their own companies, their own vessels and crew, or through joint venture or charter arrangements with bringing in large foreign trawlers. Those foreign trawlers now that flag to New Zealand, they still remain foreign owned. So that's the only difference. And as I said in the presentation that Andreas thankfully read on my behalf, it has resolved a number of labour law issues and things like maritime safety and health and safety on board the vessels, which were extremely problematic for us previously.
Thank you very much, sir. Do we maybe have any question for Mr. Gary Orr? Okay. No new question in the question answer feature, or Andreas, do you have any question for Mr. Gary?
Yes, I would like to know more about how New Zealand government give attention to surveillance issue, compliance issue, as Professor Nuno has mentioned before, that a lack of enforcement is really problematic. Even I can say that even if you have a clear regulation, you have a good institutions, scientific body or everything, but if the lack of enforcement exists, it can destroy everything. Would you please explain a little bit about this, Gary? Thank you.
Thank you. I have a workforce of 150 full-time fishery officers working throughout New Zealand. In recent times, New Zealand has introduced electronic positional reporting in real time for our entire commercial fleet. For some time, we only had limited numbers of our commercial fleet that were reporting real-time positional data. The entire fleet of 1,100 commercial vessels now report in real time. They also report in near real time catch reporting, electronic catch reporting. So not only do we get to see where the vessels are, we get to see what they're catching, so we can actually look at if a particular type of vessel is fishing in this area at this time of the year, at this depth, with this gear, we can expect to see a certain catch mix with that vessel. If we don't see that catch mix, then that flags to us that there might be something going on in terms of catch reporting. We have started last year and progressing next year to put video cameras on all of our commercial vessels as well. So we will also be able to validate the electronic catch reporting against the video recording of those vessels. So the opportunity for slippage in reporting will be reduced. The ability for our fisheries scientists and the management people to accurately assess the health of stocks, to identify what the extraction rates are, and then project sustainability is going to be greatly enhanced through that process.
Thank you, Gary. So technology is very important in surveillance, but what if a state doesn't have that strong budget to purchase that kind of advanced technology? Could you maybe give some suggestions?
Well, the way we addressed it previously was through, we had the manual catch reporting, and we would manually review risk vessels catch returns to identify any problem areas. We had observers that we would place on those risk vessels or in risk fisheries. We worked with the Navy to do at-sea boarding and inspection, and we also did port inspections, quite rigorous port inspections. What we were finding is that risk vessels were coming into port at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to try and avoid our fishery officers rather than coming in during business hours. So that highlighted them as a risk even further. So just the standard sorts of enforcement activities with inspections in port, inspections at sea, reviewing catch documentation, understanding the fishery and understanding what sort of catch mix you would get in a particular area at a time of year. Excuse me, if you don't see that, then ask the question why. So traditional enforcement methods are still very effective. Technology helps a lot though.
Very clear answer. Thank you, Gary.
Baik, thank you very much, sir. Dan Bapak dan Ibu, tidak terasa kita sudah 2 jam berdiskusi, dan sebelum saya menutup diskusi hari ini, saya akan persilahkan kepada Bapak Andreas Aditya Salim untuk menyampaikan ringkasan hasil diskusi hari ini. Waktu saya persilahkan.
Terima kasih banyak para peserta, para pembicara yang telah meluangkan waktu. Saya ingin ambil 5 menit untuk menyampaikan ringkasan bahwa pada intinya pengelolaan sumber daya ikan di zona ekonomi eksklusif sebuah negara itu adalah hak mutlak dari negaranya. Pasal 62 UNCLOS, sebagaimana disampaikan oleh Pak Hafaz, Profesor Warwick, Nuno, and also Gary, menetapkan standar yang sangat amat tinggi bagi sebuah negara untuk bisa membuka akses bagi pihak asing untuk ikut mengeksploitasinya. Ketentuan ini di dalam UNCLOS yang sering disebut sebagai konstitusi dari laut harus tertuliskan juga dalam legislasi nasional sehingga dipatuhi dengan baik demi terjaganya sumber daya ikan. Untuk siapa? Untuk masyarakat di negara itu sendiri. Kita sudah belajar dari negara Australia, negara Ghana, dan negara New Zealand bahwa paling tidak 3 negara ini tidak membuka akses bagi akses sumber daya ikannya bagi negara lain. Dan di dalam legislasi mereka ada aturan-aturan, meskipun belum semuanya seperti di Ghana tadi masih ada yang belum terakomodir, tapi paling tidak ada aturan-aturan mengenai bagaimana menentukan jumlah tangkapan yang diperbolehkan, dan bagaimana aturan domestik memprioritaskan pembangunan industri nasional, pun ada keterlibatan pihak asing itu dalam bentuk joint venture yang mana mereka tidak boleh mayoritas. Isu lain yang penting adalah yang seperti disampaikan oleh Profesor Nuno, yaitu soal penegakan hukum. Sebagaimana disampaikan Profesor Nuno, meskipun di Ghana banyak sekali lembaga swadaya masyarakat atau bahkan komunitas nelayan yang sudah menyuarakan kepedulian mereka terhadap eksploitasi yang sangat berlebihan di Ghana, nyatanya pemerintah seperti tutup telinga, sehingga akhirnya penegakan hukum tidak terlaksana. Bahkan disebutkan juga oleh Profesor Nuno tadi ada beberapa bisnis perikanan yang dimiliki oleh politisi negara Ghana. Jadi intervensi politik, lemahnya penegakan hukum itu dapat menghancurkan seluruh tatanan pengelolaan perikanan yang baik. Oleh karena itu, ini perlu menjadi perhatian Indonesia, apalagi kita negara kepulauan terbesar di dunia dengan sangat bergantung terhadap sumber daya ikan, populasi kita banyak, prevalensi stunting kita masih sangat tinggi, kemudian perekonomian kemaritiman kita masih harus dikembangkan dengan sangat besar, perlu sangat hati-hati untuk membuka akses terhadap pihak asing. Kemudian poin terakhir yang ingin diangkat adalah bagaimana pentingnya teknologi, seperti yang disampaikan oleh Gary, dalam proses pemantauan kepatuhan ataupun pengelolaan perikanan. Pun, dalam hal negara tidak mempunyai cukup anggaran untuk melakukan itu, apalagi di tengah pandemi COVID ini banyak sekali negara-negara yang anggaran negaranya dialokasikan untuk penanganan COVID, paling tidak upaya-upaya tradisional tetap harus dilakukan, yaitu inspeksi di pelabuhan, inspeksi kapal di laut, segala laporan yang bersifat manual harus diperiksa dengan baik, dan tindak tegas dalam hal ada ketidakpatuhan. Mungkin demikian yang poin-poin penting yang bisa kita highlight dari webinar ini. Saya kembalikan ke Stephanie.
Baik, terima kasih sekali lagi saya ucapkan kepada Bapak, Ibu narasumber dan peserta webinar. Semua materi hari ini akan di-upload di website IOG di oceanjusticeinitiative.org. Kami berharap diskusi hari ini dapat bermanfaat tentunya untuk pembangunan sektor perikanan yang berkelanjutan, baik di tingkat nasional maupun di tingkat global. Sebelum saya menutup, ada quotes yang ingin saya kutip dari Profesor Dr. Adrian Belapian, sejarawan Indonesia, yang mengatakan bahwa laut itu baik, laut itu besar. Air asin memberi roti yang paling manis. Memang, telah berabad-abad lamanya kita menikmati roti manis dari laut ini. Akan tetapi, kita sekarang mulai bertanya, apakah generasi-generasi berikutnya masih bisa menikmati? Saya ucapkan sekali lagi selamat sore dan sampai berjumpa di diskusi selanjutnya bersama IOG. Thank you very much for all the speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Greetings to
Bye for now.
Bye bye, Prof.
Yeah, thank you all.